Hello, 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 everyone. It's been a long time, but we're back. Say hi, Will.
No.
We're back with our podcast, and hopefully we'll be getting these out monthly, which is going to be great. But yeah, this is Metamorphic Site Productions podcast, and we are starting back hardcore with bringing content to you guys. Okay, so we're going to be doing some series of movies so that we can kind of keep on track here and get this stuff out. The first thing we're doing is not really like a movie in series, but it's movies on the same topic. And that is movies about people who went to heaven, which there are a couple out there. And the one we watched a couple nights ago was 90 Minutes in Heaven that has that
has the Chosen One in it, who is meant to bring balance to the Force. Anakin Skywalker, Hayden Christensen.
Yes, he's sporting a big old dad stash in this movie too. Whole time
and
has a mustache.
Really, really bad Southern accent.
Yeah, he's supposed to be from Texas. And he has a Texas drawl the whole time. But this is this true story. So 90 Minutes in Heaven was a book that was released in 2004. It was really popular. I remember people reading it. Don Piper, he's a pastor from Texas. This is his story. So supposedly, or not supposedly, this really happened in the 80s, 1989, I think.
Yeah, before I was born.
Yeah, before I was born too. He was in a really horrible car wreck on a bridge where a giant truck pretty much ran over him in his car, and he was pronounced dead on the scene, and he was dead for 90 minutes. A pastor comes by the accident, prays over him, and while he's praying over him, he regains consciousness and comes back to life, technically. So for 90 minutes, he was unresponsive, and he was pronounced dead. And so they immediately, put him in a hospital. They're trying to fix his body up and everything. And the whole time, Don Piper is saying, I was in heaven. I went to heaven. Like I was back here, but I was in heaven. And so he got to spend at least 90 minutes, he says, right at the gates of heaven. Now, the reason why I know all of this is not from the movie, actually, but really from the interview I watched this morning of him, because the movie doesn't really talk about heaven. I don't know. Do you want to?
My favorite thing about this whole experience, I know you can't really guess right now, but guess how long it takes for them to actually talk about heaven in this movie. 90 minutes. It takes 90 minutes for them to get to the 90 minutes he spent in heaven.
It should be called 90 Minutes Before Heaven. He's like, or after, I guess, technically. The movie takes place after the accident. So most of the movie is him recovering.
Sure. I wouldn't even call it recovering. He just spends time looking like he's hurt. He doesn't really portray somebody in pain. He just kind of is not talking to people, refusing to talk to people in the hospital with slight cuts on his face. Making
a lot of some noises.
Yeah, he doesn't make sounds that sound like he's actually in pain. It's more like mild discomfort / like he just does not want to get out of bed. Like a kid, if he's being woken up in the morning for the first day of school, thrashing around. But he's not saying painful things. He's not grunting. He's just like flailing a little bit and making weird noises, not pain sounds that you would think about in a film in general.
I mean, Hayden Christensen knows how to act in pain. He's screaming, being on fire and lava. But okay, so I wrote down some notes. We have like some questions that just to get us through. We're trying to make these a little bit more quick, a little bit more off the cuff, a little bit more entertaining, and not all drawn out and stuff. Okay, so these are I think I wrote down was like 3 things right off the bat that you just want to talk about in the movie. Okay, so mine are all random observations that are not so much about like the message of the film, because we're going to talk about that later. My first thing I have written down is, did McDonald's sponsor this movie? Because for some reason, they go to McDonald's 3 times and they talk about specifically burgers, french fries, and milkshakes like 3 times.
4 or 5 times, yeah.
And I'm like, is this like a deal with McDonald's? Did they have to do that? Was that like they get their money from McDonald's? I really need to research into that. Well, how did you feel about her going through the drive-thru and
Well,
everything?
first off, I was wondering where she found the era appropriate McDonald's that reminded me when I was growing up and we would go to McDonald's, because it's not one of those new ones. It still had a play place. It still was like the old curved roof, the old white buildings. And miraculously enough, I guess God was intervening because the ice cream machine always worked in this film.
Oh yeah, she always got those milkshakes. Yeah, but like it literally, like the wife, and that's a whole other thing. Is like the wife character in the, which she's a real person. She's based on a real person. Don Piper's real wife, Ava Piper. But the way they portray her, she's very distant and like disconnected, and I don't know. She just doesn't. I don't know how to describe it. How would you describe her performance?
I'm gonna get to that in my 3 takeaways from the film.
Okay,
So
that's fair. Okay, then I said, okay, so my second thing was the grandparents just show up and take the kids. That part was crazy.
forcefully take the children.
Yeah, so he is in a horrible car accident, like fighting for his life. And his own parents can't make it in time. But her parents come and they're like, "Hey, we should take the kids to live with us and they can go to school where we live 250 miles away and you can like focus on your husband." And my whole instinct is that's a bad idea. Yes.
Well, not only a bad idea, but when she's like, "I don't know if that's a great idea right now," they say, "No, we're going to do it." It was at first they're like, we'll ask, and if you say yes, then great. If you say no, we're going to take your children away 250 miles and you're not going to see them regularly because that's what we've chosen for you.
They're almost like implying that her parents, she had a really odd, crazy relationship with her parents where they were kind of like manipulating, controlling, at least the dad, or like the dad didn't like his son-in-law. And then near the end, she's like having trouble like paying bills or something at the kitchen table. Her dad's there. He comes up to her and he's like, "We're a family. We're gonna get through this. It's gonna be okay." And I'm like, why did we suddenly change tone here? Do you remember that part?
Well, yeah, but he doesn't even like offer financial support. He just said it's going to be okay. She's in like mountains of debt. The insurance company's not going to pay for their bills, and their court case is going to go nowhere. And her husband's still in the hospital, and she can't go back to work yet. But he's not going to offer financial assistance. He's just going to take the kids away.
Yeah. I'm like, why would they not stay at her house and just watch this? Because that's also hard on the kids to move them. Their dad might die, and now you want to take them and move them to schools and move them into a different location and like not be around their mom. Like, I feel like this, I don't know if that really happened, but I just felt like that was a bad move on their part. Personally, maybe it's just drama for the movie, but I didn't really know what the point of the drama was. It just kind of happened in the background and never was really resolved. So the other thing that I wanted to look at, so like when he actually talks about going to heaven, and we can get into this later, but he says that the people there all were different ages when he sees them, which I don't think is biblical unless he's only talking about the intermediate heaven. But like I said, that's something, a can of worms we can open up later on. But that's like the 3 things I noticed. McDonald's, the grandparents having a weird reaction, and then the different ages in the heavenly vision. So do you want to go over your 3 takeaways?
Sure. Since I didn't get to write them down, this is all just like off the cuff. But I think the first one, I'll do a fun one, is really... anytime somebody needed to say something like dramatic to him, the camera would cut in real close and like they would get right next to their ear. Like he was able to see, his eyes were open, he was able to communicate, and yet they felt the need to get right next to his ear and whisper like very softly and quietly. And it's usually something like, "Don't give up," or "I care about you." And it's like you could have just said that from where you were standing. You didn't need to get up close to his face and like whisper that in his ear. I know for me, if somebody did that to me and I was in pain or suffering, I would be more upset at that than thinking that that's nice and caring. That's more like kind of intrusive. And so, and this is not just one time. It happened several times. I think the second thing is more broad strokes. I think the portrayal of Christians in this film did not paint them mostly in a good light. They were either impatient in somebody else's suffering, like, oh, you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing, and I'm not willing to be understanding of the fact that you are in excruciating, agonizing pain, and then your life is changed forever, but you need to change your attitude, sir, or get your act together kind of stuff. Or there was very little understanding and empathy from the Christians in the film. It was like more of gung ho, let's get this done, let's get better now. Even if you can't get better physically, you just need to get better spiritually, and that's it. And there was very little willingness to embrace the fact that maybe this guy's going through something very traumatic that he needs a chance to at least wrap his head around. I thought that was kind of a big thing for me, knowing a lot of people in my life who've gone through pain and suffering. The last thing they need is to be pushed beyond their limits. Sometimes they need to be walked beside in their pain and guided through it carefully and calmly.
I agree. Yeah. So, but they do. I think the positive thing they do talk about Christians is the community. So they do have a lot of emphasis on the church helping him recover. So like we see background Christians that they show up, like his friends from his church. They help him. They are there to take care of him when he needs it. And then the mother's friends from church are a really big help to her. So they do that. But there are some times where like he has like a mentor that's from his church that comes in, and his church is called South Park Church. So we were really confused. He's like, I'm from South Park. And we were like, what? But the guy comes in and he's like trying to help him, but Will's like, I don't think he really helped him.
He was a bully. He was like, you need to get your act together, son. And I'm like, sir, he is strapped to a bed and can't move his legs and most of his lower extremities. Getting your act together is not really in the ballpark right now. It's more like learning to function again as a human being.
And he's highly depressed when he comes back, because he has this experience of heaven where he's like, I just want to go back. I don't feel like this is my home anymore. I want to go back there. I want to be with God. I don't have a will to live almost. And everyone like doesn't understand that. And he doesn't even tell anyone that he had a vision of heaven until 90 minutes into the movie, as we said before. But he has that depressive, like, I don't have a will to live anymore, which a lot of people get angry at him for, which just complicates and makes the problem worse.
Right. And I think the last thing for me, kind of in the same vein of the second one, is the wife is very impatient with her husband, and she's not portrayed as a long-suffering woman. She's willing to get to the point where she like snaps at him, yells at him, and then and I feel like this may be just me. Her arc in the movie was not redeemed at all. She didn't apologize for the way she treated her husband. She didn't apologize for being short with him or being irritated or that she harbored any feelings, because it's obvious in the film she harbors a lot of ill feelings towards him, that he let her down, that his accident is the cause of all her problems, and she clearly portrays that in the way she talks and the way she's acting. And instead of like her seeking forgiveness from God or from him, he apologizes to her, and then she's like all better now. And I'm like, I feel like that sends a bad message that in circumstances it's okay to be short with people or irritable with people, or not being willing to understand where somebody else is coming from. Because after about a week of him being in the hospital, she was done with it. She was pretty much done with him being in the hospital. And he was in the hospital for 4 months. Mm-hmm. And once that month is up, she's willing to like say mean things to him and kind of be brutal with him.
There's that scene. Do you know what I'm talking about?
The McDonald's scene.
Yeah, once again McDonald's, but like she like comes in, she's like, I'm done with your attitude. Literally, she's like, you have a bad attitude and you're not pulling her weight. I'm not. Basically, he's like, you survived. You need to be here with us. You don't want to be here with us because he's like having this great depression. Which, I mean, he does treat his family kind of poorly. He at one point he tells just his one son, "I love you so much," and then he doesn't acknowledge his other two kids, which I think is just like a weird, like, I think they edited that odd, but it came off this really weird.
Or when they arrive and within 1 minute of them arriving, somebody says, "Okay, it's time for everybody to go," and he doesn't get a chance to say anything. They don't get a chance to say anything. They walk in and they turn around and walk out. And again, these kids have not seen him in a while and live 250 miles away right now, and so that's a very quick trip.
Yeah, but the scene we're talking about, she comes in, she's like, I'm done with your attitude pretty much, and she leaves, and then she goes back to the McDonald's drive-thru, and she orders 2 meals. She did that the first time. She orders 2 cheeseburgers and 2 milkshakes, and we thought, is she going to go back there and bring him dinner, which I was like, I don't even know if he can eat solid food right now. And then she just goes home and has 2 meals, and I'm like, is it like she's so used to ordering 2 meals because she's used to ordering for her and her husband, but she also has 3 children. So like,
I'm sorry. I was also thinking about the time when she goes to the drive-thru and rolls up her window and screams, and then rolls it down, and the person at the microphone says, "I'm sorry, we don't have that available."
Yeah. So the first time is not the fight. The first time she goes to the drive-thru is like pretty early on when he's in the hospital. Then she has the little fight with him. That's the part I'm talking about, where she walks in and she says, "I'm done with your attitude. Like, you don't act like you want to be here with us." And then she goes back to the McDonald's drive-thru right after that. And then that's when she rolls up her window and screams. And the lady in the drive-thru is like, "Yeah, we don't have that on the menu." And I'm like, why do we have this weird joke in here right now? Like,
also, that is so insensitive of that person at that drive-thru. Oh, you just heard somebody screaming at the top of their lungs, obviously exhibiting some kind of deep emotion. Let me just crack a joke real quick. Let's get the humor going.
That's on brand for McDonald's employees, though. Like if it was Chick-fil-A, I don't know. Did Chick-fil-A exist in the 80s?
I think they had a small presence.
But if it was Chick-fil-A, it would be like, "Oh, let me give you this milkshake for free and a cookie, and we'll have someone come out there and counsel you." But McDonald's is just like, ice cream machine broke. Throws fries at you. Get out of here. There is that one scene where they're like, she takes her kids to McDonald's, and they're like, "We love French fries." Do you remember that?
Yeah, and the like, I love French fries too. And then it feels like it's about to go ba-da-ba-ba-ba.
I'm loving it.
And then but then we cut back to him like bleeding out in a hospital.
He has this thing on his leg and on his arm that's like excruciating painful. It literally is stretching his bones out so he'll heal correctly. And it's like they've never used it before. He's like technically experimenting on him. And then it's just like, the people are, it feels like the people around him, around Hayden Christensen's character, have no idea what to do. But not even in the way that's like, "Oh, my husband, my dad, he could die. Like, I don't know what to do." Like it's like they don't have like a common sense idea of what to do in certain situations. I don't want to be critical of people in like trauma and grief, but what are your thoughts?
I mean, it even seemed like at some points the doctors were inept. Like nobody, like this man walks in, they kind of seem like they have a protocol, and then at some point they kind of all just shrug their shoulders, and then you'll get better if you get better.
Yeah, well, he starts refusing to like breathe or trying to breathe, and that's like a dramatic point. And the doctor was like, "You're gonna breathe, or I'm gonna force you to. We're gonna put you in an iron lung."
He starts putting the tube down his mouth. He's like, "You're not gonna like this."
I know, yeah.
So,
okay, so what was the next thing I sent you? 3 things?
3 problems with the message.
Okay, so who do you want to go first?
I guess I'll go first. I don't know if I have 3. I think one of the first ones for me is, again, the portrayal of Christians in hardship. I'm willing to go and believe that, okay, the guy's actual portrayal is probably accurate to how it would be like traumatized by this accident. So I don't highly expect him to be like, championing through this, like powering through it. I understand that. But what I'm upset with is the portrayal of everyone else around him who are just kind of like, you can get through it if you get through it. And, you got this. But then if he has a bad attitude, they are quick to just call him out. There's no mercy on that regard. Another one, kind of an underlying tone throughout this. Very beginning of the film, one of the mentors to Don says, it's all about finding your purpose, whatever your purpose is. That's what this is all about. And then doesn't tell him what his purpose is, just says it's not about you. Kind of leaving it very ambiguous, not really saying God in that regard. Now, again, God is mentioned and prayer is mentioned and the Bible is mentioned throughout. But this is a repeated message of like finding your purpose. That's what it's all about. But they don't say, overall what your purpose is. Like they don't say it's to glorify God. It's not to worship him. It's not to represent him. It's not to give the gospel. It's just to find your purpose. And then at the end, they kind of reveal it's to help other people. And I kind of feel like that's a cop out, especially in light of the fact they're really pushing, like they're trying to push a gospel message throughout. And then they're like, your purpose is to just help those who are in need. And I feel like that's kind of very broad strokes that could be toned in a little bit. And I think the last thing is sometimes prayer and how it's represented. So like at the end, they're kind of talking about how everybody was praying for him, like all around the nation, all around the world. There were people in like groups praying for him for his recovery. And then he gets to the church and he finally gets a return after being gone for 4 months. He gets to the front of the church. He stands up out of his wheelchair and he says, you guys prayed and now I'm here. And then the place erupts in applause and then it cuts. It's done. It's not like, God answered this prayer or God used the faithfulness of his believers or, the fervent prayer of the righteous man avails much. None of that. It's you prayed and I'm here. And it felt more like a superstar kind of, actor portrayal. Like prayers get me here. I got here because of you and celebrate me because I'm here. And it didn't really say, thank you, God, for getting me here or, thank you guys for praying for me, that these prayers, meant much. It's like he literally just says, you prayed for me and I'm here. And then that it cuts.
Yeah, I feel like, so this film, interestingly enough, is a Christian film and all of the proceeds went to charity. So it was literally non-for-profit. Like all profits, all proceeds would go to charity for the film. But it felt very secularized. It felt like it was like non-Christian people making a movie about a Christian subject, which they didn't really understand. And I hate saying that because I don't want to, presuppose that the people who made the movie like don't know Jesus. They very well maybe do. Maybe they were trying to make it more accessible to people who were not believers. But they only name Jesus like a handful of times. Most of it's actually in the hymn that they sing, "What a Friend We Have in Jesus." And then once he says that I didn't see Jesus directly, but I felt his presence.
Yeah, that's a big thing too. I was hoping you were going to touch on it.
Yeah. Do you want me to go through my 3 things, or do you?
Well, sure. I guess we can. I kind of wanted to say it, but like one of the big things is it feels like when he opens his eyes and it shows what he saw in heaven, he sees a group of people first off approaching him, and then they kind of stand in like a soul train line around him, leading him to the gates of heaven. But the Bible says to be absent from the body is to
be present with the Lord.
Yeah, he says he felt Jesus' presence, but he didn't see him. And so I feel like that's a kind of a cop-out. I was telling Hannah, I said, if I die and the first person I see is not Jesus, I'm going to be disappointed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Because everything in the Bible kind of points to immediately uniting with Jesus and all of that. And then the first thing I see is somebody I knew in high school who passed away. I'm going to be a little confused and disoriented more than I already am being taken to the afterlife.
Yeah. So three things with the message. I'm pretty much going, the three things I had problems with the message in the film. I'm really going to focus on the actual heaven part because we don't really get a whole lot of that, which is the whole point of the movie. But this morning I listened to an interview with the actual Don Piper, and he described his trip to heaven so much more than the movie shows. He actually says that when he was in front of a gate, he says it looked like an oyster, and that it really literally looked like the pearl within an oyster. So like in the Bible, it says that the gates of heaven, they're made of pearl. But anyway, he says there's people around him that he knew that helped him become a Christian and helped him come to Christ, and that there was a large thick wall that's all around this area he was going to go in, and there was a gate, but the gate was literally narrow where only one person could go in at a time, and so they were going in single file into this place. And he says that in the center, very, very high up, you could see thrones. So he could see like where Jesus and God and the Holy Spirit said that they all have thrones there that you can see. And that's where they were headed. And then before he was walking towards that, and then everything went black. And then he heard the pastor singing the song, "We Have a Friend in Jesus." So he, in his actual experience that he talks about, he does in fact see like the throne, like that's the first thing is like he gets there and there's all these people that he knows that are there to greet him, but they immediately start heading towards the throne of God. But that's not portrayed directly in the film. Like we see, okay, so the way that the gate is shown, like the CGI golden bricks, it looks like a really bad like animation, like literally like the yellow brick road from Wizard of Oz, and there's these people who are standing on it, they're all smiling at him, and then like the gate opens up and it's like a very basic like if you can imagine like the gates of heaven, what would a stock footage of the gates of heaven look like is exactly how they portray it in the movie. There's no giant oyster with a pearl or anything in it. It's just like a gate that opens up and there's this bright light, and there's no mention of like the throne of God or anything like that. And then the thing I mentioned before in the beginning was the different ages. He says that the people that he saw were different ages, which now we might be talking about the intermediate heaven. The intermediate heaven. So I've been reading a book about heaven by Randy Alcorn, and so we have the new heaven and new earth, which will happen after Christ's return. That's our eternal home, is the new earth. But there is an intermediate heaven where when you're absent from the body, you're present with the Lord, which is, I'm assuming, what we're talking about. That's where he went. And so in the new heaven and new earth, we will have a bodily resurrection. So the different ages that he sees when he sees these people, I wonder if that's, so this is a crazy theory. I think we're going to talk about it more as we go through these movies that talk about heaven. I haven't read this book yet, but I have it on I'm going to read it right after I finish this book on heaven. Basically near-death experiences and like the similarities that people have when they have out-of-body experiences. And I forget his name, the doctor's name, who wrote this book I'm about to read, but his theory is that, so materialists say that consciousness is a product of the brain. But what he says is that consciousness is separate from the brain, but the brain interprets reality for the consciousness. So I don't know if that makes sense to you, what I said, but basically the relationship between like your spirit or your soul to your physical brain and your physical body, the brain interprets the outside stimuli and like basically makes patterns and, makes it recognizable to you logically. And so what he's saying is like, what he believes is that when people have out of body experiences, they're separated from their brain, their flesh, and they have an experience in a different dimension. And when they come back, their body, their brain has to interpret what they saw and took in. And so that's why people have similar experiences, but they're different and they're interpreted differently, almost like dreams. So some people who have a near-death experience, who don't know Jesus, they tend to say like, well, there was a tunnel and there's a bright light, or that they floated above their body and they could see what was going on the hospital room and like in the hospital table and things like that. That's common. And then they've even done weird experiments with like psychedelic drugs, where people will have these experiences where they like see these, they call them like machine elves, where there's like these spiritual beings. So what I'm saying is that I think that there are people who have near-death experiences. They're probably, and I don't know if you believe wholly that Don Piper's experience was legitimate, like he really experienced heaven for 90 minutes, came back, and if he was truly saved, I mean, I think God can grant the clarity of being able to make sense of the afterlife, because he said in that interview that I watched this morning, he said, we don't have earthly words to describe heavenly things. He has problems trying to describe what he saw, which is I think is also very common. Like we see that with Paul after he's had his visions, that he's like, whatever's coming is so great, I can't describe it to you. But I think that what he saw, what he remembers, is he has to go through his like human fleshy brain to interpret this like glorious truth that will probably be made so much more clear and so much more. It'll make complete sense to us when we are perfected, when Christ gives us our perfect bodies and we're able to experience and make sense of, the new heaven and new earth. Did any of that make sense as I said it?
Yeah.
Okay. What are your thoughts on that?
I'm always iffy about stories of people going to heaven after they die and then coming back, because of things like the verses where it says, no man has seen God but the Father, and that people can't experience like the glory and the holiness of God because they just can't handle it. And I get that they are, potentially not in their physical bodies and they're in another realm or dimension. I was telling you the other night, I'm like, you have a few instances of people getting visions of heaven in the New Testament, but they're not dead. They don't die and see it. They are either it's like a vivid vision, either in a dream or something that's being shown to them. But you don't hear of any stories of, like, maybe we get one story, but that's somebody's already dead. People dying and then coming back and saying how their experience was in the Bible. And you don't hear about that at all until the past 100 years. Mm-hmm. All of a sudden in the past 100 years, people are able to die, see heaven, see the afterlife, and then come back. And I'm confused on why we didn't have that, during the Reformation or during the 1700s or the 1800s. Why is it all of a sudden, mid to late 1900s and 2000s, people are getting these experiences? Because people were writing stuff down that they were experiencing for hundreds of years. And so either A, there are more stuff that I don't know that has been written down, but that has not been talked about prevalently, or something a little more hard to explain is going on. I have a hard time believing it if the Bible doesn't tell us that that's a possibility, that people could die, see heaven, and come back. I can understand people dying and coming back. That's makes sense to me because of what Christ did. But dying and seeing heaven and then coming back, I don't know. It's not really a prevalent thing in the Bible.
Yeah. Well, I would love to talk more about that, but we'll do that in a different episode because we're trying to keep, like I said, we're trying to keep time like streamlined here. But I think we'll continue that in future episodes on this topic we're talking about with these movies. So
let's simplify then this last part. So instead of doing 3 for each, what is one thing you think they got right about in the theology of the film?
The thing that was most inspiring to me was, that I think was right, is that when he came back, he was a changed person. That he was like, I just want to go home. I want to be with Jesus. I want to be with God. And it's weird because the people around him are like, what, do you not want to be with us? Do you not want to be with your children and your wife and all these things, but he literally counts being with God and being in that new life with him as more precious than anything. And I think that is, being with Jesus is more precious than anything in this life. And I think that is biblical and correct.
I have a thought on that, but I for time purposes, I'll hold it. But I think I like that. And I think for me, one of the things they got right is he has one really good friend that he knows from his church that comes and visits him and mentors to him throughout the time, and he challenges him, but challenges him lovingly. And you get a moment where after he's talked with him and he sees that he's really broken, he's in despair over his friend. He doesn't want to see his friend die, but he realizes that what is the one thing he says, the only thing we can do now is pray for him. And so he begins contacting people, setting up prayer networks to do the one thing they can do, because the doctor's already doing everything they can do, and he's already gotten a lot of people who are telling him bad news. So he needs people to pray over him, pray with him, pray for him. And then after all is said and done, he's back in his house. His friend comes and visits him again, and encourages him. And he's like, yeah, if you really did go to heaven and you came back, then there's a purpose for it. It's not something for you to hide and keep to yourself. God obviously has done something miraculous for you. And he's like, I challenge you that if God really did show you the afterlife and show you what heaven looks like, and he brought you back, then you have a reason to talk about that. And he was very encouraging, but he also very challenging in a beautiful Christian, lovely way. That he was the best character in the whole film.
Yeah, I think he was the best Christian example we had. Was his name David? I think his friend's name was David.
Dave or David, yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so, and then the last part is just talking about the filmmaking, like the styles and techniques they used, and then just go over what you like and what you didn't like. So do you want to go first? Do you want me to go first?
I think the thing I didn't like, I felt like a lot of the stuff was kind of repetitive. The way they did, he's in hospital, somebody comes to visit him, somebody says something, and then somebody leaves. It's the same thing. Person A walks in, says something to him, person A leaves. Person B comes in. It's the same thing over and over again. And then every once in a while you would cut, and she'd be, the wife would be crying, or the wife would be angry or upset. And it just kind of regurgitated for an hour. And it felt very long, because we get it. It was like, yes, this is what's going on, but there's got to be a different perspective. I mean, they really could have incorporated, he started having dreams about heaven, or he started, having more time. Very rarely did he actually pray. For somebody who was a minister of the gospel, who on the way to when he was about to be in a car accident, he was writing a hymn or a message, and he had been praying and talking and giving saying a creed about his beliefs. Then all of a sudden he gets to the hospital, and he prays very, very briefly at the beginning and very briefly at the end. And yet this is an hour duration of him in the hospital. It just kind of was a little jarring that it was just the same thing over and over again, scene after scene. The thing I did like, there were a couple of really nice shots of long angled shots, I guess you could call it, where you're getting a tunnel. I thought that was a repetitive thing. You get the angle of the bridge, the entirety of the bridge, and how far he had to drive, or the tunnel of people taking him to heaven, or the tunnels of the hospital taking him all the way down the corridors, or the path all the way down the church pews to the center of the church. I thought that was an interesting repetition that I thought I liked a little bit.
Kind of like he says, I didn't see the tunnel at the end with the light. It was just instantaneous, but they kind of bring tunnel imagery in this different way, and maybe to represent the path that he's on, that he's back in as a sojourner on earth, and he's on this path to do something before he officially goes home. So the ones I have written down, I say plot and pacing could use work. It's extremely slow. and everything is like a dull gray color, and it's very sad. This is a movie that I don't think is supposed to be sad, but it feels exceptionally sad. And the plot, like, I feel like the plot could have been structured in a way that just gave more like meaning and more focus on the heaven part. Like you said, he could have thought more about heaven. He could have dreams of heaven. Yes.
Or they could have just shown his vision of heaven during the accident, and then he gets out, and it makes you kind of understand better. Oh, this is why he's upset.
Yes.
And they waited an hour and a half to show us his vision of heaven when they could have shown it while he was actually in the accident. Then he gets pulled out, and you're like, oh, wow, that would be really hard to come back to the real world if you were pulled out of heaven by, God's choice of bringing you back.
Yeah, we get a small fuzzy glimpse, but we don't get the whole experience. And he doesn't he doesn't think about it a lot, or maybe he does, but we don't see him like mulling it over. The movie spends so much time and this movie almost feels like it's about his wife and not about him. And it's like she has the struggle really, where she has to he's struggling obviously too, but she has like the traditional like struggle like a character would for like a film or like a story, where she's like trying to get his case. She's trying to get money for the case or whatnot. She hires a lawyer, that doesn't work out. She has to keep working so they can have insurance. They have to move houses. They have to sell their house, and it's like it's all about that, and not so much about heaven. You could use that to talk about God and heaven, but they kind of don't. And if they did, they didn't make it very obvious. And then I already mentioned that everyone seems to be detached from each other. It feels like everyone is like his kids don't feel like they know him at all. Like his daughter is very awkward with him the whole time in this movie. Like the kids don't know how to like talk to their parents in a way or the parents to their kids in a way that feels like believable. And then the husband to wife dynamic is rough, like the whole movie. Like they are always having some type of problem, except for the very beginning or the very end. And then really, like you said, there isn't a lot of time given to them like restructuring their marriage. They have that one talk about him having the vision of heaven, and then it seems everything's okay. But they had some problems before that were really weighing on them. So once again, that could have been plot. They could have worked on the script a little bit better to make it more of just a way to present the story in a better way. I said the depiction of heaven was a bit generic and cheesy. Already talked about that. What I liked Hayden Christensen's performance. He put a lot of heart and soul into it. There were some moments that didn't click, but I think he really tried. He really gave a lot of effort, and I enjoyed his take on Don Piper, like in portraying him. I did like the cinematography. Like I said, it was very dull and gray, which is odd for a movie about heaven. Did it get more colorful at the end? Did they try to do that, or did it stay the same?
A little bit, like when he's outside or when he gets back to church. But even their new house is just muted yellows and like burnt orange colors, and I don't know. I get it, they're portraying the 90s, but the film could be brighter.
Yeah, well, especially like after I think like the eternal hope of heaven, like that's how I would probably want that to be. I want people, when they get to the end of this film, to feel that hope that Christ gives us. And so obviously like that brightness and that fullness, and not like dreary, but that wasn't my decision to make for the movie. And then the last thing was Dwight Yoakam's in this. He's a small part. He's a country singer who's also an actor sometimes, and he plays the lawyer, the personal injury lawyer, and he actually was very funny. I liked him. He was entertaining to watch.
How dare you not mention Michael W. Smith, major 90s and early 2000s Christian contemporary singer.
He only said like 3 words in the whole movie.
He threatened the mom to sing to her, and
then he didn't.
He didn't, and I was upset.
Did they even have his music in the movie?
No.
Why would they have him in the movie if they didn't have like one of his songs?
But they did have that dance song from the 90s that they were dancing to.
That's right. Was it Hope You Stand by the Ocean and Feel Small. I Hope You Dance.
But you couldn't have Michael W. Smith sing in his movie that he's already in.
Yeah. Well, I think we've gotten to the end of our little questionnaire for this movie. So yeah, it was a good attempt. I feel like there were just some areas that could have been greatly improved for the purposes of the story. It just is like to be the biggest criticism is that it's boring in a lot of areas, in a lot of ways, the way that the film portrays it.
I think you hit the nail on the head. Like, it's supposed to make you feel bad for him that he's not in heaven anymore, but it doesn't really make you excited for heaven. It just makes you realize the pain and suffering at earth. And I think that's the whole thing is like, oh, it keeps harping on insurance and bills and pain and suffering and abandonment and anguish and anger. And it's like, oh, side note, he went to heaven. And instead it should have been like, he went to heaven and he's noticing the hurt and pain, but he's continuing because he has hope. He is continuing because God has a task for him on this earth, and as long as he's here, his job is to continuing being a father and a minister, but yet he's hoping for that eternity now he has been promised. And instead it's like, oh, by the way, it's kind of like the heaven is a side note in the movie 90 Minutes in Heaven.
I know the way they portray earth and the way they portray heaven barely gets any screen time compared to the pain and suffering of life. And I just feel like we're still missing the mark here about when we're talking about what God is promising us. We're still, I don't know. I feel like they could have given more precedence to that hope of eternity and not so much to, bills and insurance and pain and suffering. Okay. Well, that will be our first podcast of 2022, I believe. But yeah, it's been a pleasure having my husband here. We get to talk about movies again and about Jesus. Are you going to sign off?
Where's the log out button? To scroll up here, drop down menu. Okay, log off. No, okay. I don't want to. Don't remember me.
Okay. Well, God bless you, and we'll see you soon. We'll be back on talking about another movie. Bye.